Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric Series, the Unported Playlist, where I take some of my favorite unported arcade games of all time. And today, if you can't tell already, you did click on the thumbnail after all, we are playing Star Wars Racer Arcade. This is also running on the Sega Hikaru hardware, and when this thing came out in arcades, absolutely, it was one of the most graphically impressive racing games out there. And it's one of those things, if you're a massive Star Wars fan, you are absolutely going to love this game. It has so many callbacks to the movies and other fun bits. Before we get too involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, I got a Patreon link down below as well. But Video Game Esoterica has a bit of a confession to make, and don't go into the comments and start yelling at me quite yet. I have personally never loved any Star Wars property whatsoever. I am not saying they are bad, I'm just saying they've never been for me. I have friends that absolutely watch everything Star Wars and try to convince me into getting into it, and I try, it's just one of those things, it's never quite clicked with me. So my review of this game is going to be strictly from an arcade racing perspective, because I really don't have that much nostalgia whatsoever for any of these movies. I've definitely seen them all as just one of those things, watched them with friends, moved on with my day, never really came back to them. But as far as Sega arcade racing games are concerned, if you know me and the channel, you know full well, I have a massive amount of nostalgia for basically everything Sega did in the 90s and early 2000s when it came to an arcade racing game. And Sega was definitely a great company when it came to licensing out properties, and I will say Star Wars here, definitely a fun time, but it is going to take a little bit of getting used to because of course you are not racing on a car, you are on a speeder, and you definitely have a complete different set of physics. It is going to take you a little bit of time to wrap your head around that fact, and you're definitely going to be very bad at this game the first couple laps until you understand exactly how the vehicles control and what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. But once you understand that concept that these vehicles don't control or drift like cars, they control and drift like something from the Star Wars universe, it will start to click. And because it isn't super apparent in the footage, you have 3 turbos per race on your vehicle. But I can't stress enough, you want to reserve those for straightaways when you have a lot of opponents in front of you, because you can go from 6th, 7th, even 8th place all the way to 1st place with one well-timed turbo, and you do not want to use them in the corners. It is a surefire one-way ticket to basically hitting the wall and scrubbing almost all of your speed. And you'll see here the cars don't really actually drift, they bank and kind of slide up from the back, more in a hover bike way, even though obviously I've never driven one of those, so I really wouldn't know how they feel whatsoever because they don't technically exist. But I have definitely drifted vehicles in my life, both intentionally and accidentally, and I'm pretty sure they don't control anything like Star Wars Racer Arcade here. You'll see there I did pop off one of those turbos, and I basically get like 5 places ahead very quickly. But Star Wars Racer Arcade is not an easy game, even though I am playing this on easy difficulty. Like basically every Sega arcade racing game out there, it is going to test your patience in all the best ways to learn the courses, learn the vehicles, and get better at it. And that is always a ton of fun. Now luckily I played this game exactly once in arcades back in the day, but I got to play it on the 50-inch showcase cabinet where you basically sat in a plastic replica of one of the vehicles from the movie, and those things at this point in time are absolutely almost extinct. If you know where there is a cabinet, leave me a comment down below because I would be curious. But even though the Hikaru was delicate and definitely is a bit rare these days, I would say I still every once in a while see a standard arcade cabinet for this game out in the wild, just because it definitely was popular because it was based on Star Wars when the entirely new trilogy was coming out, and also arcade operators still keep these things alive because when people see them, myself included, you want to throw a couple quarters into them and give it a play or two. But I'm going to go into the first of 2 soundtrack samples here, at least I think I am, because it does have a little bit of Star Wars music in the background, and so often that presents a problem. So you're either going to get 45 seconds of music and sound effects, or I'm going to have to remove the music in post, and you're just going to get those sound effects. But it's never easy with any sort of Star Wars game, especially on the long plays that I sometimes upload. So either enjoy some music as well as sound effects, or find out that I basically got hit by Disney and we couldn't do it. But short of that, I'll be back in 45 seconds to talk more about the game, which I think you're really going to enjoy. But here comes music, I think. So you either heard 45 seconds of the sound effects, soundtrack, and announce, or you heard nothing. We'll just have to find out after this thing goes live. But it's something that always drives me nuts on the channel, because even though the music is intermixed with the sound effect, it still seems like every once in a while it will catch that Star Wars music. But moving on, I would say, just like almost every Sega arcade racing game, the way to play this more effectively is going to be first-person view. And it is kind of fun that even though it is first-person cockpit view, you still get the vehicle out in front of you on the left and right, because of course, unlike a car in a racing game, a lot longer of an actual vehicle here. And when you're going through these canyons, the sensation of speed absolutely just works. And do know that you do actually have basically what amounts to a life meter in this game. You will see some of the other vehicles explode, although honestly in regular racing, I can't even remember the last time I was able to basically damage my vehicle enough where it was a problem. It basically is just something, it is a mechanic, but they don't use it all that much. But going through all these stone arches here, trying to basically just race a clean line and find out the quickest line from point A to point B is a lot of where the fun in this game comes. You'll see right there, I definitely misread that one. And again, it's one of those things. Maybe I'm just missing something about Star Wars. Maybe I haven't quote-unquote watched it the right way, but I don't really get anything from this game for it being Star Wars based. I get a lot out of it just being a Sega arcade racing game that has a different feel. If I was going to say, this reminded me of any one game in particular, not as far as the content is concerned, but the feel of the vehicles, I would actually say it's Midway's Hydro Thunder, which is funny because Sega made plenty of games on jet skis, but this honestly feels close to Hydro Thunder for me. But if you have any sort of tip on how to quote-unquote watch Star Wars and try to get into it, leave me a comment down below. Because there's so many different TV series, there's so many different movies, it would give me basically like a year's worth of watching content. It's just every time I try to actually sit down and enjoy any of it, I just never really stick with it. I kind of zone out and either end up looking at my phone or walking away. And again, don't get mad at me in the comments. I'm not saying it's not good, I'm just saying I've never quite figured it out. But the reality is sometimes things just aren't for everyone, and some games I show on imported playlists in the channel I say are some of the best games of all time, and some commenters say they tried to play it, they just didn't get into it, and that is totally fair. But honestly, the fact that you could even play this game now with Demul emulation is in and of itself an absolute triumph, because for the longest time this game would run, but it would have terrible graphical glitches, especially any area that had water, because your car would actually just end up disappearing under the water like you'd see here, and you basically have no visibility whatsoever. So the fact that the Dev Metallic here improved Hikaru emulation, and now you can sit down and run this thing at full speed is absolutely amazing. And just so you know, I'm running an i9-12900K on overclocking and water, as well as 64 gigabytes of RAM and a 3080 Ti, so you have kind of a benchmark there. One more soundtrack sample, maybe one of these things will take, and I'll be right back to close out the video and tell you more about the history of the Hikaru. And I just squeaked that race out at the final second there. But the interesting thing about Star Wars Racer Arcade, as far as the Sega Hikaru is concerned, is the fact that it still exists out in the world in decent numbers. And if you haven't watched some of my previous videos on the Hikaru, it was manufactured with an issue. That is the fact that all of the ball grid array chips didn't have their pads tinned before they were attached to the PCB with the solder balls. That gives them a very delicate mechanical adhesion, and even so much as a slight bump and those chips can fall off the board. But for some strange reason, that doesn't seem to happen to Star Wars Racer Arcade, because there's at least still a lot of them out there, and when they move these cabinets around the floor, that is enough to definitely damage them. So I have absolutely no proof of this, because I really haven't been able to find one of these boards to buy, but I feel like maybe somewhere down the line, Sega and the manufacturers realized this was an issue and changed the process, because if you're going to find a working Sega Hikaru arcade cabinet, it's definitely either going to be for Star Wars Racer Arcade or NASCAR Arcade, some of the games that came later in the life. But I could just be making that up, because again, I have no factual basis for this. It is just kind of something that's interesting to me, that if you do see these games still on arcade floors, it's usually Star Wars Racer Arcade, or maybe manufacturers and maybe all the arcade operators want to keep these things running because they keep making money, so they find somebody to fix them. But short of that, that is Star Wars Racer Arcade. It's a legit fun Sega arcade racing game that is going to be made a ton more fun if you're a huge fan of the Star Wars franchise. If you're just like me and you never got into it, it is still just a fun arcade racing game from Sega, and honestly, that's all we ever really need. But I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.